Welcome to The Beautiful Side of Grief, your go-to podcast if you're wanting to hear from people who have moved through heart-wrenching loss or those who are at the coalface supporting the process. It's diverse, heartwarming, though most of all it is positive and filled with go-tos that you can use yourself. I'm your host, Helen Morris, and I'm a health professional turned energy healing practitioner after I lost my only child and daughter, Tal, in a car accident in 2017. I want to use my own unique experience with loss to help you navigate your journey. You will hear from grief coaches, mediums, authors, first-hand loss accounts, plus many, many more. I'll put the links to any free resources in the episode notes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can keep informed of each weekly episode. So now grab a pen and paper if you want to jot things down. Sit back and relax as we navigate the beautiful sides of grief. My guest today is Rachel Engstrom, and I think you're really going to get a lot out of what we're going to cover today. When Rachel was 28, she thought her husband had the flu, only to discover he had a terminal form of cancer. In the next couple of years, she navigated holding things together while being his caregiver to ultimately facing losing him at 31. Now what? The years that followed were filled with ups and downs as Rachel found her footing in life again. And it's this journey that led her to writing a memoir, an awesome guide to all the situations she wished she had had some guidance on. She really delves into the nitty-gritty of filling out things like insurance forms and so much more, such as weeding out toxic people in your life, even if they were a best friend. She is honest, heartfelt, and has an upbeat positivity that helped her through many of her own health trials after losing her husband. So thanks for joining us. Be sure to share this with anyone else who you think could benefit from listening to this episode or this podcast. And now, sit back and enjoy Rachel's story. Wife, widow, now what? My guest today is Rachel Engstrom, and I'm very, very grateful to have you with me here today, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Helen.
You're welcome.
My sister's name is Helen. I don't hear that often. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Hey, look, I thought we'd start this conversation by understanding a little bit about you. Who were you before you went through this incredible journey with your husband, Grayson, and his diagnosis with leukemia? How would you have described yourself?
Yeah, so I was really young, 28 when he got sick. I was working full time at assisted living with mentally ill adults, integrating them, getting them out in the community, doing things like that. A couple years prior to that, I'd gotten my master's degree in social work. I was on a local here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities area in Minnesota. I was on a LGBTQ aging board. I'm very involved with that. I nannied on the weekends for some extra cash. So I was going to concerts and just young, loving life. My late husband, he worked nights, so we didn't see each other Monday through Friday. We saw each other on the weekends. So I met him when I was 19 and he was about to be 26. So when he died, it was 2 days after I turned 31 and he was 37. So this whole time that I had been with him and he was working nights, I had been with him in the secure relationship, but also having friends and going out and doing things like that. So
Yeah.
I was very active. I was very active
living
with
life
him,
to the max.
without him. Yeah. In my, young in my 20s and, going bowling with friends and concerts and doing things. So that was me. I was a happy girl. And for a few months we had tried to have a baby. We had bought a house a little under 2 years before he got sick. And we bought a house, we had a dog, we were wanting to have babies, things like that. So it was kind of late 20s, the natural progression. So that's where I was thinking that, I was going to be married to him forever and life was going to be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I can so get that because, that's the time you're settling down and everything's falling into place for you. So what was it like when you got the diagnosis that he was ill? I mean, because it was a 2 to 3 year journey for you. So that's quite a long time. But take us back to when you initially got that diagnosis? Because I think you thought it was the flu to begin with, right?
Yeah, I thought he had the flu. And then he went into, I gave him so what happened is I woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and I found him sitting on the floor in our kitchen. He was so tired he couldn't even wait the 90 seconds for the microwave. And he'd been working 3 to 11 for his career. He'd been working extra hours at work, and tall, thin guy, naturally thin, but he was pretty thin at that point. Looked really tired, super pale. So, I gave him the business card to my doctor because he didn't have a primary at that time. And he went there the next day, and they thought that he was anemic. So they sent him to have blood transfusions. So the next day he had blood transfusions. And when we were there, they said, actually, just wait a minute. And they sent us to the Humphrey Center. They didn't tell us that it was the Humphrey Cancer Center. So then there he was misdiagnosed with a rare blood disorder that was doable. It was like a treatment of a couple months or something like that. And we thought, okay, but he was crying when we got home because he was just so tired, so stressed out. And I'm looking online, being the research nerd that I am, thinking, okay, this is doable. I'm seeing that, people in the world have been treated for this. So then we got a call that evening, and the person said, Grayson, that was his name, Grayson, what we found is, different. It turns out you don't have that. And he said, that's good, right? And she said, actually, no, we need you to come in and have a bone marrow biopsy. So the next day he had a bone marrow biopsy where, if you're not familiar, they right above your back hip bone, they take a little bit of bone marrow to be able to look at that, to look at your blood beyond just like a blood draw. And at that moment, I knew that he had leukemia. And I forgot to say the night before when we were leaving the clinic, he raised his hands in the air and said, at least I don't have the big C. So it's almost like this domino premonition. So as he's getting this bone marrow biopsy, and it's very painful, he's anesthetized, he's put out. I'm asking the nurses that are in there about it, and they're pretty much thinking he probably has it too. And they're telling me, people go on to be doctors, lawyers, run marathons, things like that. So I'm thinking, okay, even if he gets sick, he'll be fine. So I'm pretty optimistic at this point and thinking this is just what's going to happen. This is life. This is, we'll get through this. We'll be fine. But the gravity of him having cancer, he doesn't have the official diagnosis isn't there yet. So this is a Friday, and they tell us that we'll get the results on Monday. That's a really long time to make somebody wait. But luckily we got the call on Saturday morning, and he was officially diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is the kind of leukemia usually only the elderly or primarily small children get. So at that point, I would say for the next 2 or 3 months, it was like I was in a daze, kind of automatically doing what I needed to do for work, insurance, letting people know what's going on, kind of just going through the motions. And at the same time, spending hours and hours online trying to find resources and trying to find support and trying to figure things out. But it was really weird because I was only 28 and I knew no one that was going through anything like this.
So that's a really tough, lonely time. Did you have family and support around you to help you through that?
I did in spirit. I moved here to Minnesota from Michigan when I was 18 to go to the University of Minnesota. So I didn't have any family here, still don't. And my brother, who lives 7 hours away, he actually drove down here. So he was here the first couple weeks, which was really, really helpful. But so he was in the hospital for what they call it, the induction phase for the first 5 weeks when he was inpatient. And then after that, my parents that have been married 55 years now, 45 at the time, they were 65 and 72. And they said, you know what, we're going to come live with you and take shifts. So of the 27 months of his illness, 18 of them, they lived with us taking shifts. So I had that live-in support, taking him to his appointments, doing all that, which was amazing, which ultimately has created the beautiful side of grief that this is a relationship and a bond that the three of us have in a way we wouldn't have otherwise. Of course, it's awful that happened, but we were his primary caregivers, so we have that.
Oh, that's beautiful. So I know that, it was a long journey. And because you've got a medical background and certainly a medical understanding and you like researching in that, how soon in the piece did you start thinking, what if we don't beat this? Was that pretty early on the piece, or were you quite positive that you were going to find the treatment, the solution to get you guys through this? Or did you always have that sort of niggling at the back of your mind?
Honestly, I never thought he wouldn't make it. I knew that he could die, but as the healthy spouse, I was the manager, the team captain, the cheerleader, everything. So I didn't have the luxury, I believe, I didn't have the luxury to believe anything but that it was going to go back to normal at the end of the commercial break, at the end of the show when you watch a TV show and everything's good by the end.
Yeah.
That was my assumption. So when I was told, I'm sorry, 5 days before he died by many doctors, that was when I really found out, and he'd been sick 27 months. That's when I really found out that he was going to die, because I'd been with my faith and everything, I thought miraculously he was going to be fine. He can't die because we're so young, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So those were my thoughts.
Yeah, I understand that. I so get that. So did you still manage to have some, meaningful conversations with him about what end of care life or end of life would look like for him, and how you guys would navigate that together and what he wanted? Did you have any of those sorts of conversations?
Well, the hospital had us fill out a healthcare directive. I was like his
Yeah.
power of attorney for, finances and whatnot. But to fill out the healthcare directive, he said his wishes of what he wanted, but we didn't really have those tough discussions. Not that I remember,
Right.
but the whole thing is PTSD. So it's
Yeah.
writing Wife, Widow. Now I had a professional editor, but I edited it myself 8 times as well. So each time I call it a labor of love and PTSD. I've distanced myself from it, but it's kind of like people that have had traumatic things go on. I've had my family, I've had siblings say, like, we totally had a conversation about this. And it was during that time, and I don't remember it at all. And they're like, oh, yeah, we totally did. So we may have had a conversation or two, but it was mainly just, we're going to get through this. And at one point, I told him, after his bone marrow transplant, a month or so before he died, I remember saying, like, I'm so proud of you, that you're doing this for yourself. And he's like, no, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for us. So kind of, I guess you can read between the lines of that, but it was just understood if anything happened, I would make the call, which I ultimately had to at the end.
So what were the toughest challenges for you to navigate during this time?
Of his illness when he's still alive?
Yeah. Just like what were the key things that you had to sort of navigate that you felt were, whoa, I never expected this. This is really tough. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get over this hurdle, whether that was during or after.
I think a big thing is, so my book is based on Caring Bridge, which is a website here, and it's local out of Minnesota, but it's nationwide, and it might be global, I'm not sure. But it's where you have posts to update people that get your blog posts. So instead of getting texts, emails, phone calls from people that want to know how they are. So my book is the Caring Bridge posts, the face posts in chronological order from right before he's diagnosed to, so that's January of 2011 through fall of 2015. And he died in 2013. So when I'm figuring out diagnosis, treatment, finances, all of that, work, whatnot, I actually walk you through all of it. So it's resources for people so they know how to do all of it. That was tricky. It was kind of like, wow, I really have to grow up on a different level now. I have to call the insurance company. I have to figure out these things. I'm talking to his employer because he's too sick. He can't. I'm dealing with disability. I'm dealing with all those things. So that was a big one. Another was just really, you don't have any privacy in your world anymore. It's
Yeah.
blowing it wide open with, like, I remember his mom, she wanted to give our address to people so they could send us cards. And it was like, I don't want strangers that I don't know to send me cards to my house. I mean, it was kind of like even those types of things. I think one of the trickiest things was I was so tired all the time because I'm running back and
Right.
forth from work to the hospital. And the first 5 weeks before my parents were there, it was got to let the dog out. You work, then you let the dog out, then you go to the hospital, and then you go home and you have to leave him. So I think a part of it was really close energy. I have some really funny stories in my book. I went to a silent Buddhist retreat, a silent Catholic retreat. I'm not Buddhist, I'm not Catholic, but I just wanted some Zen time by myself. And at the
Yeah,
Buddhist
absolutely.
retreat, I just kept sitting on my little mat and falling off of it. I would fall asleep. I would slide down it because I was so tired. So I think just the balance of that. And then I did get to the point where within the first year and later, where I wouldn't go to, because he was hospitalized many times for fevers and things, where I just had to tell myself, it's okay if you don't go every day. You need a day at home, you need this. But that was really hard. It's really hard not to feel like you should be doing everything and knowing that you need to do stuff for yourself. I was fine going
Yeah.
to a concert every now and then with friends and things like that, which a lot of people still would be like, how would you do that? But I had self-care in those different ways. But I think you do have a lot of guilt of trying to balance it all. And all you really want to do is just hide underneath the covers on your bed and
Yeah.
just kind of hibernate like a bear and then wake up and it's all better.
Yeah, disappear for a while. I know those
Mm-hmm.
instincts are so strong, aren't they? But then so is the instinct just to keep fighting, keep doing everything, trying to be the superhuman person. So I so understand how you needed to have that self-care for yourself, because that was like a brief respite where you got to think about something else other than all those immediate not problems, but all those immediate things right in front of you that you were having to deal
Yeah.
with. Yeah. And you'd sort of recently bought a new house. So, only a couple of years earlier. So, like the finances around that and having to go to work, did you work right the way through?
I did. So I worked full time. I switched jobs the year after he was sick. He was well enough at the time to do his ADLs, his bathing, showering, being able to do those himself. And when I switched jobs, one of the natural benefits they had besides health insurance was a life insurance policy. So I took $30,000 policy on both of us. So
Yep.
luckily I was able to, and I know this is a blessing that not many people have, but when he died, I actually didn't work for like 9 months. I quit my job. I rested. I had
Right.
had really bad reproductive health myself. So I had a hysterectomy because I could barely walk. So there's a whole nother level of grief of not being able to have kids and doing these different things. But it was just being able to breathe and be. And I talk about all these things in my book, but one of my sisters came to visit a couple months after he died. And I had been sleeping so much. And she was like, oh my gosh, you look like a whole other person because I was finally rested. I mean,
Yes.
you don't get a lot of rest when you're running back and forth to the hospital and doing all of these things.
Right. I know, because I had to go back to work about 3 weeks after I lost my girl, and it was too soon. You go back into this coping mode, but really I would just get home and I would just crash. It
Mm-hmm.
was so exhausting trying to mentally get my head in that space and to do a good job, and took everything out of me. So when I got home, that was it. I was out for the count. So what gave you the strength to fight for yourself, during this time? Because you talk about having to survive a calamity of errors. And I know you've briefly touched on that you had your whole own journey with your reproductive health and things like that. So you obviously had a few things happening.
Yeah. So after he died, one of the toughest things is it's like you totally, even though he wasn't working the whole time he was ill, we still had his Social Security disability payments and things like that. And his dad had died when he was a teen. So there was a trust fund where, his mom was helping us for a mortgage payment and things like that. But still, after he died, even though I had this money, it was after that ran out, it was, or, it's getting lower and lower. I'm selling everything and anything that I don't really need on eBay, Amazon, doing garage sales several days a week. And then I'm also, when I went back to work, I worked 3 part-time jobs. I did some part-time nanny work jobs that kind of fell through. So that was really discouraging. But then I ended up getting these 3 part-time jobs. 2 were with children that were autistic and had different development, Monday through Friday, like morning for a couple hours, afternoon for a couple hours. So I would go to sleep in between. And then 3 nights a week, I helped a woman with multiple sclerosis get ready for bed. And even then, with these 3 jobs, piecing them together, I barely, was able to pay for my mortgage and everything. So it was really tough, because you think you're going to have this house with who you plan your life with. You think you're going to fill it with kids. You think they're going to help you pay for it. And I had my house on the market in spring of 2015. I was going to pack it all up, move to Maine. So I sold a lot of things, told everybody I was moving, and one street over, a house the same year, 1956, same layout, listed for $20,000 less. And then I decided I couldn't sell my house for that, because I wouldn't have enough money to profit to move. So I decided to stay. So I just went to like IKEA and bought, in a Target store here, and I bought, new rugs. So I, just bought new things to spruce up my house, try to make it a little bit new. And it was, as much as I didn't want to know, it was kind of like, all right, well, here's another thing that didn't work out, but make the best of it. My brother, who's 14 years older than me, told me at the very beginning, of the illness, you can choose to be bitter or better. And it was another time where I could have been really bitter, but I had to choose to be better. And, ultimately I believe God kept me here for a reason. That fall, I ended up getting a job, and the cubicle next to me is the person that I am now married to it'll be 5 years this fall. I can't have kids. He has a daughter that was 4 when we met. All these things end up falling into place. The beautiful side of grief, different things happen. But, my faith in God and just my ability to be positive, I really think that I've always been good at adapting to what comes, having to just suck it up and go with the flow. But it was kind of like, I've had so many bad things happen at this point, when I'm going through the grief roller coaster. I really learned throughout it, like, it's like you're on a roller coaster and they lock you in, the bar goes down, and the person that works at the amusement park, how they pull up on the bar to make sure you're in there securely, and then they go back to the person behind you. You're not getting out. You're locked in. You're not getting out. So now you just have to ride the ride. You can't, nothing's going to happen. So just learning to ride the ride and embrace it, and know that some days we're going to be ugly, some days we're going to be prettier. I think that was ultimately what helped me survival-wise.
That's great. I'm glad you had that inner strength and faith to guide you through that. Now, I'm just going to share the title of your book again, just if people are wondering about it, because we're mentioning it. Yeah. And I'm going to also, I know that you go through a lot of these things in your book, but I want to sort of lead this into my next question. So your book is Wife, Widow, Now What? How I Navigated the Cancer World and How You Can Too. And it's about surviving in any number of ways. And tell me, what do you wish you had known to help you cope with this journey, whether it was right at the start, midway through, after you lost your, precious husband? What do you wish that you had known?
Yeah, so to put it in context, it has been 8 years. I have cried knowing that I wish that I would have had this book. I think that the thing is that it doesn't matter how supported you feel by your family and friends or whoever's around. People really aren't going to get it. They're not going to get it unless they go through it. And like, I will, God forbid, never know what it's like to lose a child. just as it's different from losing a spouse or something like that. But when someone's like, oh, my aunt died or my grandma died, it is not the same thing, as you know. And it's one of those things where it's like, I had this woman I write about in the book. I had this woman from church, and God love her. She had done a fundraiser for me. She meant well, but she kept telling me she was a widow, and she would stop by my house. My house was right down the street from the church. She would stop by the house, and I was smart to never let her in. I would just talk to her on the porch because I knew she would have never left. But one day she's like, oh, yeah. No, I'm not really a widow. It's that my husband volunteers at church so much and golfs. I feel like I'm a widow. And I was just like, I just wanted to
No
slam the
way.
door in her face. Yeah. So it's just one of those things where it's like when people say, oh, I understand. Or, the worst thing you can say to someone that's going through something like that is, I get it, or I understand. You could say, I can't imagine, or, I have no idea what it's like. Could you tell me? Or, something a little, I mean, people really do mean good intent, but sometimes it hurts more, especially to your very vulnerable ears.
Yeah.
I wish what was interesting to me is I just found out more and more and more through the illness journey and beyond how many levels of strength and resilience someone really has. You don't know
Yes.
that you have these like reservoirs. It's almost like you're out in the desert and you have a water bottle and you're out of water, yet it magically refills itself. Like you really don't realize how much pain, suffering, and sorrow you can go through. And hopefully, if you're someone like me, still be able to see gold nuggets of amazingness. So an example I like to give is, it doesn't matter, or I should back up and say, what I'm going to say doesn't make your situation easier, better, or more fair. But those pictures we see, of people in Alaska go, in those Klondike Yukon days where they would go up the mountain and they'd be panning for gold and
Right.
doing those things, and, dressed in their little windbreaker jackets compared to our, amazing coats we have today. They left their families. They put it all on the line, not
Yeah.
just wanting a couple nuggets of gold. More than likely, your grief, your loss, your story, what you're going through is going to give you nuggets of gold that you're probably not going to understand for years later afterward. That will ultimately lead to a new career or volunteering, or even being able to just say, Helen, I understand. I've been there. I am so sorry. What I do for a living is I work for a behavioral health insurance company, and I get people connected to counseling to go talk to a therapist.
Yeah.
And when I
Great.
do get a widower in my line, I feel like it's just a divine intervention thing, just to be able to
Oh,
say, I am so sorry. I have been there. And a lot of people are like, you're so young. And I'm like, yes, I am. But
yeah.
it's one of those things where if you can authentically say something to someone, or look them in the eye and say, I'm so sorry, I've been there, that will make someone feel whole in ways someone that hasn't gone through this won't understand. So I think that, having those experiences and having that outlook, those are the nuggets of gold that will ultimately come out of your tragedy or your toughness
Oh,
that you're going through right now.
gosh. Those really are gold nuggets. You touched on something which I just made me really remember some of the things that happened to me. And you said about, you were explaining about that lady from the church who described herself as a widow. You get some really strange people coming out of the woodwork who, in grief, who are suddenly your best friend, and you haven't known them at all hardly, and they want to be your best friend. And it's like they want to latch on sometimes to this experience that you're having. And I used to find that really bizarre, like I never knew quite how to handle these people. It was almost like that's what their thing in life was yeah.
It's
So
kind of akin to like when someone wants to touch a pregnant woman's belly, and they're like,
yes,
oh, you're in
yes,
my space.
yes. yes, and totally inappropriate at times. Like I remember a neighbor coming to me just a few weeks after I lost my daughter, introducing me to this guy, Helen, meet such and such, such and such meet Helen, and as soon as he said that, I was thinking, is this what I think it is? And then he just kept going, and I went, yes, it is. And I was just thinking, whoa, that just blew me away. But that's what people do. They think they're trying to make it better. Here, look, you have a partner, somebody to help you through this. But it was just a little bit early, really.
Or do you find that or back then the other thing is it's like you spend time assuring other people that you're okay instead of them comforting you. That's really bizarre because you're like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm doing well. I'm doing fine. Thank you. It's been a while. It's been a few years. I really da da da. And you're like, why is it my job?
Yes, exactly. And, I even went to talk to somebody and my eyes must have started welling up as they do out of the blue. And he said, don't start crying on me. Don't cry. Don't. And I was going, okay, I've gotten that. But I was like,
Yeah.
whoa. It was just bizarre. It really does force you to look at life differently and situations differently. And, for me, it was, I think we're kind of kindred souls in that we were always looking for those glimmers of light and hope and, those little gems that we could latch on to try and say, okay, this is going to be okay. We're going to get through this. Yeah, I don't know how, but I'm just trusting. Yeah. So that's
I
great.
always thought it was like, when you have like a vacation coming up or holiday, as I think you say, coming up and you're like, okay, I know I have 6 days and you don't know
Yeah.
what every day exactly looks like, but then you're like on it and you're like, now I have 5 days. Now I have 4 days.
Yes.
That's what it was like. But it was like, this is my life now. Somehow it's going to be okay, but I don't know how. But it's
Yes.
like God doesn't
Yes.
give you the blueprints. You don't get the maps, but you somehow ultimately know you're going to be okay. You're kind of in a crap storm right now, but you're just believing it's going to be okay. And that's kind of
Yeah.
just the way that you have to go.
I know, because you can't stay in that place for an extended period of time without it taking a huge toll. I mean, and that's, what I sometimes, try to help others understand as well is that, yeah, it does feel like a shitstorm right now. And it does feel like you're right in the center of it and that there is total darkness and no hope whatsoever. That's what it feels like. But you know what? Look at it a year down the line. Look at it 2 years down the line. And that
Yeah.
seems like impossible to do at the time, but just get through the next hour, the next day, the next week. Just keep doing it like that. And then one day you find yourself looking back and going, oh my gosh, I'm laughing and I'm happy and I'm smiling and this feels really good. So yeah, eventually you will get to that space if you allow yourself to do that. So I think sometimes
Yeah.
people get stuck.
And one thing I like to talk about too and recommend is I talk about, self care and all these different ways of adapting, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. You can't replace what's not there, but you can make new traditions. You can adapt things. You can surround yourself with positive people. I had a friend of like 12 years that I was going to be the maid of honor in her wedding. And she just became so toxic and judgmental that one day I just like pulled the ripcord and ended that friendship. And it was very dramatic, but it was, you really have to pick and choose who you surround yourself with. And it's very similar to when you quit a job and you realize like a week or two later, wow, the people that were like my great friends were really just like the work people, right? Now, how
Yes,
we have
yes.
relationships change in our life. So I think not only the people you surround yourself with, but the TV shows, the movies, the films, the music, all of that, there's so much out there that even 8 years later, if there's like all these movies pop up on Netflix and Amazon and wonderful things, they look great. And then I read the description, it'll talk about, someone has a cancer diagnosis or someone's dying. And I'm like, no, I'm not
Yeah.
going to watch it. I'm not, because it's,
Yeah.
even though I'm
Sure.
fine and it's all these years later, I
PTSD.
think, yeah, well, not only that, but I'm in a good place now. So
Yes.
I think that when you're in grief and you're in a really tough space, don't make it worse. I
Yeah.
talk about in the book all the funny TV shows, and I just remember belly laughing watching TV shows and things and thinking to myself, I'm okay and things are good and I'm going to be good again. And, life can be wonderful. And I think that that's the tough thing, is when people have a catastrophic loss, whether it's a parent or child or significant other.
I was just going to say, like, it's a good opportunity now that you've just mentioned all of that, just to take the time to discuss, what does your life look like now, post having gone through all of that experience? What have you taken from it?
So I actually completely distanced myself from the cancer and grief and loss world. In 2014, actually, just for
Yeah.
I really needed a break. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to know illness. I had seen illness, literal death. He had been in the ICU twice, so I'd had people dying. I could hear Blue Oyster Cult's "Don't Fear the Reaper" song. I don't know if you know that, but I could. It was so. I just needed to be surrounded by life. I'd been
Yes.
around so much death and illness, and my friends had a fundraiser for me shortly after he died, and I was blessed to take that money, and I went to Alaska for nearly 3 weeks by myself. I took a cruise, and I was always like, tell me what you will. I've seen the Titanic. I will not go on a cruise. Well, I didn't think I'd be a widow at 31 either. So,
Yeah.
And being able to be around mountains and glaciers really makes you feel the size of a pea, compared to everything. You're just so tiny. So
Yes.
I really decided why I took the jobs I did, as well as I didn't want to do social services. I couldn't help people. I'd worked with physically and mentally ill people that needed help advocating. That's what my degree's in, helping advocate for people. And I thought, I can't fix myself right now. I can't help other people. So in going through that, just for fun, I took classes in grief counseling. So I learned about different forms of grief, whether, suicide, the complicated kinds, the ambiguous kinds, different things like that, culturally different rites of passage around death and all those types of things. And it gave me a little more closure on that. And I started piecing those journal pieces in order and thought I should write a book. In the spring of 2014, I started putting those in order, and they just made me so depressed. So I stopped, because it just took me right back to where it was. And I thought, I'm not ready yet.
Yep.
So I worked those couple jobs. I worked at the health insurance company. And then in 2018, I should back up and say I got married in 2016 at Lake Tahoe in California. We eloped. We let people know, but we eloped, just the two of us. And then in 2018, I started piecing the book together and writing anything and everything I thought might be applicable when you're not in the mindset to be able to navigate things. Because when your person gets sick, you're thinking, I don't want them to die, and how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get them cured? So I decided anything and everything that I needed to know back then, put it in order, put it in a book. Same with grief and loss. I have navigating, funeral, memorial, finances, everything. I have finances, how to go through your budget, during the illness, after the illness, all of that. So now I've published the book in the end of September last year, 2020. And since then, you are my 36th podcast I've been on. And I thought about creating my own, but I think it's more powerful to be on. It's a lot of technical work I don't want to deal with, to be honest, but I think it's more powerful to be on the different things. I've been on ones about death, ones about grief and loss, ones about cancer, ones about mental health, wellness. I think it's really powerful to share the different avenues of how these circumstances can affect you in all those different ways. It's pretty incredible how full circle I've come with things. I was a child who was I was born in 1982, had older siblings. that I heard, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Prince, and I became totally obsessed with Michael Jackson as a kid.
Yeah.
I had a sister that lived in California, and I bought a tabloid book when I was 13 and made her take me to his house, and I stole rocks from his driveway. Two months ago, a podcast I randomly found called The Power of Love with Dee Dee Jackson. I had no idea it was one of the original Jackson 5's ex-wife is their children that did this podcast. So I'm doing a podcast with Michael Jackson's nephews now, and they've asked me to actually come back because unfortunately their mom was killed in the 80s, and they have this amazing foundation to be able to help children and people through programs and grief loss, and they do this podcast or whatever. So that's why I brought up the whole Michael Jackson thing. It's like crazy, full circle. You never know what you're going to get. And it's one of those things where so many people are impacted in so many ways. So I never would have thought I would have been that widow alone in my house crying, jobless, husbandless, childless, to excited to talk to someone like you and be an advocate to say you're going to be okay. And from mid-March to mid-May, I did a 10-week campaign for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, had a team of a few friends backing me, and I ended up raising $51,000 for blood cancer. And I got a grant in my late husband's name. I had to get $50,000. So now I have the memorial grant for him for a kind of lymphoma that, thank you, kind of lymphoma that someone I know has that's not very well researched. So I'm just like pumped to do this. So ideally, I want to be able to help people go through their homes, clean out their homes, whether through illness or grief and loss, and help them fill out the paperwork, help them navigate things. So I want to make Wife Widow Now actually a business in helping people in practice, in person. And I'm just so excited. And I never thought something so horrific could be this cool.
Oh, I'm so pleased that you shared that, because that's often what people don't see. They're busy feeling sorry for you because they know that you lost your past husband really young, but they don't see how your life has opened up in a completely different way that you probably could never have imagined ever. And it's the same for me. Like, I feel grateful every single day. Like, yes, the experience was horrific and still leaves me shattered some days. However, what I've gained out of it has been priceless, and I'm so grateful and for every single day that I've been on this journey myself. So you wrote your book, like, because I love this, that I love the way that you've made it sort of like how to help people, but you also share your story, which is quite a different way of writing this book. How did you manage to find the right way to mesh that all together?
Yeah, I just did it. And I do want to say also, so I have like gastrointestinal disorders. I have IBS. I have a colon disease. I have migraines. I have endometriosis. So she went through a horrible thing, and then she wrote a book, and life is great now. Because I like people to know that it's not like I'm 100% amazing and okay and life is wonderful and now I'm trying to sell this. I do like to say, like, what's amazing are the nuggets of gold that have come from tragedy.
Yes.
Are coping things that help me today as well, because life still is really hard sometimes. But when I do have, an IBS, like irritable bowel syndrome flare-up, I have this stupid, really restrictive diet, but it works.
Yeah.
But when I do feel really ill, I'm like, you know what? You're not in a hospital. You're not hooked up to stuff. You've seen it. Suck it up, Rachel. You'll feel better sooner. And I think those are important perspective things we're not going to get unless we've gone through it. So I just had to say that part. So as far as the book, I just kind of did it in a natural flow of when I did this is how I did it. So like I work at a health insurance company, so I'm familiar with copays and deductibles and payments. So I'm walking you through exactly what it means. When I'm talking about how hard it is to ask people for help, I explained these are things when people want to help. This is a list of things to tell them. When you're in these shocked states, you don't think about it. So I was able to reflect on all these things years later in ways that I actually couldn't back then. So I just naturally weaved it together in a story of, here's where I am. You can see my actual words when it happened in the post. And then this is me trying to navigate it. This is me falling on my face, and this is me picking myself back up.
Yeah. So that's great because people can just go straight to where they happen to be at that particular time, put the book down, pick it back up again. I love that. That's such a great, great gift to people is how I see that. You also, we're just about to finish up, and I've got a few more questions just to finish it off with. But just before we get there, you also have a playlist that you listen to throughout this journey. What role did music play for you in this?
Oh, huge. Definitely huge. One of the biggest things was when I knew he was going to die, I made a heaven playlist, and I made myself listen to it a few months after he died, and I was totally fine. But, I was very calm through his death and the days leading up to his death. I mean, I believe that was God, but it was inevitable. It was kind of like, if you're not going to get up and walk out the door with me right now, I just want this to be over. So, a lot of the music I would say would be listening to in the car on the way to and from the hospital or things like that, or what we listened to together. So I picked out maybe like 40 to 50 songs per year that were really prominent on my mind, on my heart, that can zero in and take me back to those times. And I'm someone that's been to, nearly a couple hundred concerts. Music is such an integral part of my being. And I thought, how cool would it be if someone wants to put this together and listen to what I was listening to as they're actually reading it? So I want to give that as an option.
That's so cool. I love that because very, very powerful. It's just those different frequencies, vibrations, and they have the ability to lift us up and out of what we're currently in. So, yeah, thanks for sharing that. So the other thing I want to know is, what is the best thing that's happened to you today or this week?
I'm going to say within the last 7 days.
Yeah.
We'll go with that. I went camping last weekend with my husband and stepdaughter and drove halfway, and my brother drove halfway, and I saw him, his wife, and 2 of his 3 daughters that I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years because of COVID.
Wow.
So being out in the woods, way too many bugs, but being out in the woods, just camping, sitting around a campfire, and just being there in that time, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And I know you've touched on this throughout the podcast, but what's your go-to? Like when you're having a really tough, dark day, things are not going right. What's your go-to to get you out of that?
I have this thing. I don't remember to do it as often as I'd like, but those that are listening, you can't see me. So what I do is I fist one hand, and almost like you're doing a windshield wiper. When you're on a plane, if you've been sitting close enough to the front, how you can see the flight attendant actually shut the hatch. I like to get a toxic thought or person or whatever out of my mind. I do my arm towards inside my body. I shut the hatch, and then I put my hands, put them out in front of me, my arm straight, and I'm pulling back. So to me, I'm closing the door of the plane and I'm backing up from the runway and I've given it to God, and I'm just saying, it's out of my hands. I also have this little thing where sometimes if I'm just this toxic person in my life, or, just whatever, I'm wanting to just get out of my head, I put one hand someone's going to drop candy or something in it. You're cupping your hand, and the other one, I'll put my fingertips together, and I'm almost this is my imaginary little present box with a bow. And if I'm driving, I'll actually unroll my window and throw my hand out, I'm throwing it out. And even in the winter, I'm people probably are what is she doing? But sometimes I'll do it out my deck door or whatever. But it's you're getting the bad energy, the bad thought, the bad whatever out of there. And I think it's just so important to you have to let it go, because things, after he died, as many of us do, you have the woulda, coulda, shoulda. And you can't. You can do that for a while, but you can't. You just have to figure I did the best that I could, and I'm
Yes.
going to move forward. So I think, just those little ways of just getting it out there is important.
Yeah, because it's not ever about forgetting that experience or what you've gone through. It's about being able to survive for yourself as you move forward. And I think that's a good distinction to make. So that's great. What are your 3 takeaways that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Number one, you are not alone. So
Yeah.
many people, unfortunately, are going through, and will go through what you're going through. It is not fair. It's most likely unnatural. It's not supposed to happen. But these core things, your pain and your loss, mean that you loved. And what's really difficult is a lot of people do have complicated grief where it might not have been, it might have been an abusive situation or a not great relationship or whatever, and you're trying to have closure, you're trying to do all these things. But just know that even though the person is gone now, you can choose how to move forward. You can choose how to treat people. Say if you weren't someone that was treated well, or you didn't treat that person well, you have the ability to do that with people going forward in your life. You have the ability to make that change. And, I am not one of those people that believes when people are like, oh, everyone has a dream and they can do whatever they want. No, they can't. Finances, whatever. Lots of people don't. You can't make that happen, right? But you can choose your mindset. It's not always easy, but that bitter or better. And I have a chapter in my book called Bitter Betty because I was at certain points. But just really that you do have the ability to reflect, and it might take you years like it did for me. It might take you. I had fun. I had joy. I had, even months after he died, I have a gigantic peacock feather tattooed on one of my calves with the word serendipity, because despite horrible things happening, I still found joy. On one arm and the inside in very large letters, it says blessed. And a lot of people, my parents think I'm defiling my body, but I have had amazing things happen. And I think that it's you choose your path, you in different ways. Say you're stuck in this small apartment in this small city, not where you want to be. You can make little changes every day, whether it's that cup of tea that's your favorite or going for that walk or doing those things. You have the power to do that. And I think that that's really positive. And then the third thing would be, again, just the takeaway is just surround yourself with appropriate books, whether it be Wife, Widow, Now What, you can find on Amazon only, and you can find it where you are. But whether it's the books, the music, what you're exposing yourself to, that's really powerful, because you can make things worse by exposing yourself to stuff that's going to bring you down. Listen to positive stuff, watch positive things. I'm watching Cheers again for like the 5th time because it makes me so happy. I'm watching it right now. I'm watching it, before bed. I watch it after work, and it's just one of those silly things I have on in the background. And that thing that brings you comfort like that, just hold on to it, because it doesn't matter if anybody else gets it. What feeds your soul, go with it.
Oh, so many pearls of wisdom there. Oh my gosh. Seriously, I just love what you've said just in those 3 takeaways, but also right throughout the whole time we've been chatting, because I know there are people that need to hear this. I know that what you've made this chat about is that, no, it's not perfect, that there's still a lot of stuff that still goes on, still goes wrong. Life isn't happily ever after. But do you know what? It still can be damn good. So
it can.
Yeah, and I love that, and I thank you for bringing that positivity and that perspective, to our listeners. And definitely, the link to your book will be in the episode notes for anybody who wants to click on that and share your journey and your how-tos of how you got through bits and pieces. And seriously, Rachel, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Helen. This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode today, feel free to share it with others. Hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of each weekly episode. Also, rate and review. especially if there is more you want to know that perhaps we didn't have time to touch on today. And if you are after resources to help you out on this journey, head to healingtobeYou.com and check those out there. So until next time, be kind to you, and thank you for joining us on the beautiful side of grief.